Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name's Sarah and I am an embroidery tutor and I specialise in hand embroidery. In today's video, I wanted to share with you my planning process. This is the method I use to organise myself when I'm starting a new project. And I'm going to take you through step by step everything that I think about and consider when it comes to designing. I'm going to be using my project planner to help me with this process. I could not do it without this planner. It is a lifesaver. So let's go ahead and get started. So this is my planner that I like to use to plan my projects. I spent a long time trying to find a planner that was suitable for what I wanted, but I couldn't find one. So I decided to create one myself, and I'm really enjoying using it. So it's the Embroidery Project Planner. And let's turn to our first page so I can talk you through step by step of exactly how I plan a project. And this project is the YouTube Beginners Flamingo course that I'm going to be putting out on YouTube in the following couple of months. And it's designed for those that are new to embroidery or haven't been stitching for a while. So step one in my process is creating an outline, and I need to be able to define what I'm creating and who it is for. Obviously, as I run an embroidery business, my projects have very specific aims. For example, is the project for a class? What type of class? What skill level? Those are just some of the things I have to consider. If you're not an embroidery business, you'll be considering other things, like do I wish to practice and refine my cut work, for example. So this page is here for me to work out what's priority for my design. The dates I'm going to start, the technique that I want to use, the finish size, who's designed it, and then I've got a little progress bar I can fill in as I go. And then I like to write a general task list. So if there's anything I need to do specifically for that task, I can put it in here. Now, I don't necessarily fill in my task list right at the beginning of a project, but it's there ready to go when I start creating the design. So that's the first thing I like to do, is to create a little overview. Once I've got my outline, the next stage of my process is to gather my inspiration. It could be images I find on the internet, photos I've taken, examples of stitch combinations. We've got lovely little colour palette inspirations here. This was a kit I designed a long time ago, and this is my main inspiration for this project. So what you choose inspiration from will vary for every design. The resources you gather could be printed images, they could be sketches that you've created yourself, or bits you've already collected like postcards. When it comes to photos and things like that, I'm always keeping my eyes peeled for interesting patterns or things that inspire me. For example, I sat in a coffee shop the other day and the wallpaper was a beautiful oak leaf design, so I snapped a quick pic of that and I've filed that away in my phone. And I try and organise these photos into one folder so they are easy to find and I don't end up forgetting them. I also like to keep a little inspiration book, photos of things, sketches in patterns. Nothing has to be perfect in here. It's all just about me collecting ideas. A lot of stuff I do comes from inspiration and sources that I've collected. So I strongly recommend you keep a little book like this just to keep hold of these things. And once I've collected all of my inspiration, I like to stick everything down in a mood board style, as you can see here. So I've got a few more images here that I'm just going to add in. I picked these because I like these corally colours. You can see I'm leaning into the paisley. Another flamingo that I've stitched. I thought that would be handy to pop in here. It's just an opportunity to collect all the information that you think might be useful, things that inspire you, colour palettes, stitches. You might also find it helpful to write little notes, anything that you think will help. So even if I think I'm not going to use a reference, I still like to include it in my mood board. Quite often I look at something and that sparks a different idea inside me. Feel free, obviously, to make it visually pleasing and inspiring for you. Step 3 is to create my line drawing. I took the original line drawing and I traced over it with my new idea. I then scanned this onto my computer and opened it up in Illustrator on my iPad to create a refined line drawing. Of course, you can draw your design out, you don't have to use software. Once I'm happy with my design, I print out a few copies to use to create a drawing for this page, a stitch plan. I might want a colour plan, an order of work, and a padding plan if needed. I would write any notes I have, obviously, on the design. This design isn't printed out to 100%. I'd write the scale on, and any other little notes that I want to add can go in this page. So you may have a different process for creating your line drawing, and you probably won't be using Illustrator. Do whatever works best for you to create a smooth, clean line drawing. So step 4 is to create the other plans needed, and for every design and technique this will be different. For example, for this one I don't need a padding plan and I don't need a order of work, and basically on the copies I use these to play around with stitch ideas and colour combinations. You can see I've written in pencil so I can change things as needed. So you can draw in the stitch roughly if you want to get an idea of what it's going to feel and look like. You can just write the stitch. I don't tend to put in every single stitch, it's just so I've got an idea. If I'm planning for a course or a class, I also like to write a little list of stitches in the notes section. So at the time of designing, I can get a rough idea of how long the course will need to be. Again, as I'm choosing stitch combinations, I like to refer back to my inspiration board and look through books to get ideas. And if we turn over, we have the colour plan. And generally, I like to use a limited colour palette to keep the design nice and refined. And I often use colour pencils to get an idea of what colours will go where, so I know I'm creating a balanced design. This isn't super detailed, it's just literally to get an idea down of what colours are going to go where. And by doing this, I'm able to determine whether my design is nice and balanced. You'll find that with every design, the planning pages will look different. Some may have more detailed colour drawings and there'll be no stitch plan. So if you're doing a silk shading piece, for example, others, like this one, will just be a stitch and a colour plan. It all depends on the technique, but you've got space in here to put everything in that you need. So step 5, I like to gather my materials, and I always start by raiding my stash, and then I like to make a note of what I need to buy. These materials that I have, I will then stick into my planner with notes next to it about what it is and the colour or size reference. So we've got a page for threads and embellishment, so that could be things like beads, maybe you've got some little sequins that you want to add. And then we've got a section for fabrics, miscellaneous, so this could be things like wire if you're doing stump work. And then I've got a section for tools and equipment, and then needles. Again, I'm just writing those down. So these are the colours I've chosen. Again, keeping it simple, I've got 5 colours. There's 2 ways you can stick this in. You can choose to just take a little section of your thread like that, stick it down at the end, and then right next to it what it actually is. Now, personally, I like to use what we call thread wraps. So this is 1 strand of each of these colours wrapped around cardboard, and I can stick this in here with a little bit of double-sided tape on the back, and I will write the colour next to it in this column here. So I haven't got any embellishments, any more threads. It's a basic design, so I don't need those other pages. Now, just with fabric, not much to put in there. It's a lovely linen. And again, I'm going to attach it in the same way as I did my thread wrap. Just use a little bit of double-sided at the back there. And then I'll write next to it what it is, and that is oyster linen. That's the colour. And the weight of it is Tropical by Ulster Weavers. That way I have a note there, so if I need to buy some more, I've got it as a reference. Now, just go back to the thread wrap quickly. I really want to show you how to make one of these, so let's go ahead and do that now. I've got a thin piece of 600 GSM card. It doesn't matter too much thickness. And I've just cut it to the width of a ruler. And I'm going to flip it over to the back. And I'm just going to mark on how wide I want each section to be and how big I want the end sections to be as well. So I've decided to do 1 centimetre at either end and 1 centimetre worth of wrapping for each of my colours. So I have got 5 colours. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 1 centimetre at the end there like that. So I'll use that as a guide for how wide I want my strips to be. And I'm just going to cut this at the end here like that, because I don't need that bit. And I'm going to run some double-sided tape along the length. And this is narrow double-sided tape, so I'm going to do 3 strips. And then we're just going to peel off this backing. So I'm only going to peel it down to reveal the first section that I'm going to wrap. I'm not going to peel it down more than that because we end up getting stuck to things. Perfect. Okay, now I'll pop that to one side. It doesn't matter what colour we start with. I like to organise mine through dark to light. So I've got my dark, medium, light here. And then these two here, because they're just by themselves. You could do them in either order, whatever you prefer. So I do like to arrange mine in an order that makes sense for me, but it's not absolutely necessary. I'm going to start with the darkest. I'm going to take a long length and cut that there. I've probably got about 60 centimetres of thread. And it's actually more economical to use one strand at a time. You use less of the thread, I find. So I'll just pull out one strand here like that. This is going to be obviously the back. And I just lay the thread down. Line it up roughly with my mark. And then I turn it round. Try and make sure that is level. And then I go around. And keep going round. And we just keep going round and round. And once you've got a few wraps in, you can just press those down so they stick. And I'm trying to butt them up next to one another so we don't have gaps. And then you won't probably have enough thread. We're just going to trim that end. Push that down. We'll get a new piece. And we'll do the same again until I reach that first little line there to mark my centimetre. I'm going to start off the thread in the same way. So you don't have to do 1 centimetre width. You might want to just do 1/2 centimetre like that. You might want to do 1/2 centimetre and have a gap of 3mm, 2mm in between each colour. I like them to be next to one another so I can see how the colours blend and run through. But you do it the way you want to do it that makes most sense for you and your project. There we are. Push that down. And we'll repeat that with the next colour. See, these colours are quite similar. So it's good seeing them like this. It gives me the opportunity to see how close together they are. And perhaps if you're doing a silk shading, you might find that you need a lot more colours. You might decide to have one of these boards per colour family. So all your pinks on one board, all your oranges on another, and all your greens on another board. Because you could have 6 or 7 pinks, same number of oranges, and 4 or 5 greens or something. So you don't have to put them all on one board. And we'll do one more little wrap. And then just stick down the end, cut that off. And then we can add some more double-sided tape to the back here, peel that off, and then obviously stick it down in place, ready to go. So step 6 is to write my to buy list. So as I work through my stash, I make a note on what materials I'm missing in my suppliers list, which is here. So this could be threads, fabrics, maybe I need some equipment. So I'll put the product up here, the colour number if I know specifically for thread, how much I need, and then the website that I plan to buy it from. And I will just jot down the product and the colour initially. And then once I've gone through the whole project, I then work out the website and the quantity that I need to buy. Step 7, I like to evaluate my stitches. And this involves going back to our stitch list that we made on our stitch plan. You can see I've got them all here. And running through them all and see if there's any I'm not familiar with or I need a quick refresher of. I'll just make a little note of them over in my resources page. For example, with this project, I've chosen wheat ear stitch in the neck of the flamingo. It's not a stitch I really ever use, so I've made a note of what book gives me instructions of that stitch and how to work it, and I've got the A to Z of embroidery stitches. I've got the author, the format that it's in, so a book, and the location, so the page number in this instance. Now, it doesn't have to be a book. It could be a YouTube video or another educational source, such as a course you're doing or social media. But when I'm ready to work that stitch, I can quickly reference the book or the resource easily without disturbing the flow of my stitching. Next stage, step 8, is where I like to start my sampling and writing up some notes on my samples. This is my opportunity to test out any of my ideas if I'm not 100% certain on something. It could be colour combinations, stitch combinations, the thread I'm thinking of using, or even just to use this opportunity to practice a stitch I'm not that familiar with. And I can then write up any notes on anything I want to change or what I might do differently on the actual piece. So I've sampled a little section of the body, stuck it in with double-sided. I like to see the back. I've got another little wing section here. And I've put here, I love the little V-stitch that I've done in between the back stitch outline. So that's that little stitch there. I think it adds a really interesting texture and effect to it, but it's easy to do. Now, I must keep this design relatively easy because it is for beginners. I've made a note that I've used 2 strands of stranded cotton. And then I've just put a question, should the French knots be a little heavier? Should I work in an extra strand for the French knots? You can see as well that I've not finished sections and I've tested out whipping here and weaving here on the back stitch, so 2 different examples. I don't worry about making them look perfect. It is a chance for me to test and play. Then we move on to step 9. So as I'm working through my project, I really like to track any expenses and the time it takes me to complete each stage. So for me, this helps with kit costs and calculations, and it helps to plan lesson schedules. But for most people, you'll find it just an interesting record to look back on. So at the moment, I've got no expenses. I don't actually need to buy anything for this project. But if I did, I would write the date there, what it was I bought, how much it cost me, and then I'll have a running total in that column there. Very similar with our time tracker. I put the date in, this description of what I've done, how long that took me, and then I've got a running total down here. So I'm 8.5 hours so far with me sampling, sourcing threads, designing, stitch plan, colour plan. So we're just shy of 10 hours for designing our piece. And then we've got to add our framing up time, our stitching time and everything like that. So I fill in that as I go. The same with the expense tracker. So step 10, I like to evaluate a project. I like to include photos on one side and then do a little write-up about it on the other side. It doesn't have to be in depth, but I find it can be helpful in moving forward with future projects. You might want to include the date started and the date completed, the technique that you worked in, the total cost and the total stitching time. And then I've just got a few questions that I like to answer. So what worked well with this piece? What didn't work as well? What was your favourite part? What didn't I enjoy? We're trying to forget that part. And how could I improve? It doesn't have to be huge sentences on this. It's just a nice opportunity to just have a quick reflection on what worked and what maybe didn't work as well as you had hoped it to. So you've got everything together as a lovely little reference to look back on. And that is it. That is how I plan my projects from start to finish. I hope you've enjoyed today's video and found it useful, and maybe you've picked up some little tips for your own planning processes. I do find it so helpful to have everything organised neatly in one place, especially when you're working on multiple projects. It can get very confusing and very overwhelming if you've got 5 projects on the go. So I find this really helpful. If you like the look of the project planner, the embroidery project planner, you can purchase these from my website. You can buy the physical copy, or they're available as a PDF that you can download and print off yourself if you would rather. I'll put a link for those down in the description box below. If you've liked the look of the project that I've been taking through this process, then I will be doing a little video series on that coming up soon, hopefully within the next month or 2. It's going to be a little stitch along series, and it's perfect if you're new to embroidery, or perhaps you've had a bit of a break from embroidery and want to start off with something gentle and ease yourself in. It's the perfect project for that. Hit subscribe so you're notified of when those videos come up, and I look forward to seeing you then. That's it from me. Bye.